Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining early. I really appreciate that. Hang tight. We're going to get started right around 12 o'clock. And in a few minutes, I will go over some webinar housekeeping and an introduction. So hang tight and we'll get started in just a couple of minutes. Thanks. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining early. I really appreciate that. We are going to get started just around 12 o'clock. And at that time, I will go over some of the webinar housekeeping and a little introduction and some information about the current drought that we're experiencing. So hang tight. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining early. I appreciate that. We still have quite a few people in the waiting room and over 600 that registered for this webinar. So we are going to get started in just a minute or so with an introduction, some housekeeping about the webinar, and a little bit of information about the current drought that we're experiencing. So hang tight. We're going to get started really soon. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining on time. I really appreciate that. We still have quite a few people waiting in the lobby that are hoping to join here, but we are going to get started with the introduction and a little bit of housekeeping about the webinar. Our guest presenter today, Noelle, has a lot of information to share, and I don't want to cut into her presentation too much. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started with a little bit of webinar housekeeping. So I'll just go over some of the housekeeping as I mentioned and some information about the Water Authority drought and its indices. So for today's webinar, the mics and cameras will be turned off for the duration of the presentation. Typically, if you're having issues with your speakers, they can be found under the microphone symbol, and you can choose which speakers your computer is playing the audio through. That's usually the issue. Our presenter today is going to cover a lot of information, so I'm going to move through this pretty quickly, not to cut into their presentation too much, but just in case the presentation goes a little bit beyond 1 o'clock, we're going to keep going. But if you need to leave at 1 o'clock, you will still receive the rebate. The chat will be disabled, but we will have the Q&A open, and you can type in very simple, if you could please only limit those to simple questions. We have very limited staff that are helping to manage this, and we don't have a lot of time to answer long questions, but we are happy, however, to answer any and all of your questions. And if you could send us an email to our Ask an Expert email address, which will come onto the screen here in a little bit, that would be the best way to get more detailed and thorough answers to some of your landscape and irrigation questions. So if you are a Water Authority customer and you do qualify for the rebate, we have all of the information that we already need from your registration to get you the rebate. And that will appear on your bill under the total adjustments line on your bill itself. It can take a while, however, so it can take up to 90 days or 2 to 3 billing cycles. So just know we have your information. We will work on it. It's not going to show up right away. It can take some time, but if you have questions, you can give us a call on our hotline or our Ask an Expert email address. So, as many of you have been hearing, it's been really all over the news, is that we are in a really severe drought right now. Our snowpack is at some of the lowest ever measured. We are expecting the Rio Grande to dry up, maybe even by the end of this month, which will be maybe one of the earliest ever. And the Water Authority also has its own drought stages, and these are more of an operational stage to if we have acute shortages. However, because the state in our county is in a drought severity coverage index of 300 or above, that triggers what we call our drought advisory, which means that we can host these webinars as well as provide extra measures for marketing about the drought and other conservation measures that we have. So this gives us several opportunities to help highlight our operations. I'm assuming that many of you are familiar with our operations. We have a redundant water system. Luckily, we both receive water from the San Juan Chama project when available. Unfortunately, we're going to be getting one of our lowest amounts this year that we've ever had, and which means that we are going to be forced to rely on our aquifer, or our savings account, as we like to call it. And this is water that we're saving for future generations. And it becomes especially important more now than ever to try to conserve water, because we're going to be switching to our aquifer here coming up within the next week or so. However, this does give us an opportunity to talk about water conservation and our long-term planning. So we have a document called Water 2120, and this is a long-term planning document where we can have a sustainable water supply for the next 100 years. This doesn't mean that we're out of water in 100 years, but we still have a sustainable supply. This is a very progressive document, and I believe we're one of the only water utilities in the entire country that has a long-term plan for this far out into the future. So it is a bad drought. It's really important that we all conserve water to do our part. However, we do have a plan, and we have been planning on this. And this will be addressed through using sources of water, recycling water, conserving water, and aquifer storage and recovery projects. It also means that it becomes especially important for our customers to help with conserving water, as well as helping your neighbors to realize that they are wasting water. So we have a water waste ordinance where you're not allowed to use sprinkler irrigation between 11 a.m. and 7 p.m. So please Or if you see fugitive water or geysers or water running down the street, no one really wants to waste water or have a high water bill. So please help your neighbors out by reporting water waste. We have a hotline that you can call, or a really nice online water waste reporting tool where you can add photos and your location. It becomes especially helpful if you can note the time, lots of details about where you saw the water coming from, and photos if possible. And we will go out and visit, and then your neighbor will receive, or anyone else, just a warning letter letting them know that this was reported. And so they have a chance to fix that before it starts turning into a violation. We have a ton of great resources that I want to extend to everyone, and we will be following up with an email next week that will have a lot of the links to the resources we're talking about today. So don't worry if you're not able to take notes, we will send those to you. A couple of the resources that we offer: our popular xeriscaping guide, you'll see it on the right there. This can be downloaded as a PDF from our website. It's mostly about plants, and it includes a master plant list in the back with details on over 600 plants. If you haven't already been to it, the 505outside.com is the Water Authority's dedicated yard and garden website, and it's a great place to get started with information about our rebates and the efficient best practices that we're going to be speaking about today. And we also have a great monthly newsletter associated with that website. If you scroll down to the bottom, you can sign up for that. We don't share your information with anyone, and it's chocked full of great expert articles from local experts, a plant of the month, and a bunch of other great information about our events. As well as I mentioned, our Ask an Expert email address that you'll see there on the third bullet point. That's a great way to reach out to us. One of our experts will get back to any question you might have about plants, irrigation, design, rebate, so on and so forth. So that's a great way to reach out to us. So today, so I don't cut into Noelle's presentation too much, we're really excited to hear from Noelle Johnson, who is an author, horticulturist, and consultant, who'll be sharing simple, practical techniques for creating healthier, better-looking desert shrubs. Now, I've been incredibly frustrated with the poor shrub pruning practices that are unfortunately all too common, particularly in commercial landscape maintenance in Albuquerque. And when I came across Noelle's guide titled Pruning Shrubs the Right Way, I felt an immediate sense of relief, and honestly a lot of joy that a fellow plant professional is helping to spread the message about stepping away from the hedge trimmers. And I often say that landscaping can be a field of, quote, repeated mistakes, where someone is taught the wrong approach and it gets passed along again and again and again. And my hope is that Noelle's presentation today will help to interrupt that cycle and move us toward better practices that truly benefit our plants. So with that, Noelle, thank you for being here, and please take it away.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here and talking about a topic I am quite passionate about. So let me get it going. All right. Okay. Uh, we're going to talk about shrub pruning, but you're also going to learn about some interesting facts, some of which may really surprise you. And our goal is at the end of our time together that you are going to feel confident with knowing what shrubs to prune, when to prune them, and you're going to save time and money and water. So let's go ahead and get started. Have you ever driven through your neighborhood or maybe a friend's and you see a landscape like this? Filled with basically green blobs. They're just formless. There's no color. There's no interesting shapes. And we just drive by and we don't think twice about it. But I want you to remember this picture because we're going to come back to it at the end. Okay, and I'm going to point out a few things and how we can actually rehabilitate an area like this. Here is a landscape where you can tell whoever pruned these shrubs were very meticulous about it. I mean, they are perfectly round and they're very proud of it. Now, in the Southwest, we have a culture of mow, blow, and go when it comes to our landscape maintenance. And whether homeowner is doing it or the landscaper. It's something we're pretty good at. But what we're going to find and teach is that it's not always the best way. It's not the best way to be taking care of your plants, specifically your shrubs. So what we're going to talk about today is why the frequent pruning of flowering shrubs is bad, when and how you should prune. We're going to discuss two different types of flowering shrubs. So if you have flowering shrubs, they're going to fall into one of these groups. What type of pruning tools do you need? And we're going to discuss three different types of pruning that you're going to need to know. And at the end, we're going to discuss how you can work if you have a landscaper. This is how you can work with them. If you have maybe your partner, you need to get them on board. We're going to discuss that as well. All right, let's get going. Amos, thank you for the introduction. My name is Noelle Johnson. I'm also known as AZ Plant Lady. I do live in Arizona. And I am an author, a columnist, and a horticulturist. I got my degree in plant biology with a concentration in urban horticulture from Arizona State University. And I help people like you every day learn how to garden successfully in hot, dry climates. Uh, I'm the author of the book Dry Climate Gardening and also the Water Smart Garden. And I've been fortunate over my career to work with a bunch of different entities because you all know the Southwest is a very unique area. And it's a place where traditional garden media, such as what we see on television, what we see in many books and magazines, does not, it ignores this part of the country. And gardening here is very different from other regions. So that's why I'm so glad that you are here, and we're going to have a lot of fun talking about pruning. First of all, let's look at some examples of pruning gone bad. Here we have, this is Texas sage, Texas Ranger. It's kind of shaped like maybe a loaf of bread. Here we have a landscape with what I call cupcakes. These are perfectly pruned into the shape of cupcakes, but surprisingly, these are actually flowering shrubs. Here we have what I call gumdrops. They're perfectly little round shape. Again, these normally flower. Here we have kind of a ball. And here we got into mushrooms. All these, it's I chuckle, I laugh when I see these, but at the same time, it makes me sad because repeated pruning like this can result in this. And this is a poor shrub that has been pruned badly for years. And this is what they've ended up with. Now, the bigger question is, why are these shrubs still there? I mean, the one next to it's already dead. Why aren't they just pulling them out? It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Here is a landscape where we see a lot of this could be in anyone's neighborhood. You have a little patch of grass, and then you have all these different green blobs all around there. And sadly, they've even done it to the tree. Should never do that to the tree. But all of these shrubs around here are flowering shrubs. And yet every month, this homeowner pays money to have a landscaper come and prune them into these shapes. This does absolutely nothing for curb appeal. It does actually the opposite of curb appeal. It wastes money. If you're doing it yourself, it wastes time. And it's not good for your shrubs. So let's discuss why pruning matters. Good pruning will encourage healthy growth. It improves the flowering of your shrubs, and we like flowers, we like color. It will help maintain their natural shape when done correctly. and it will prevent plants from becoming overgrown. Now, the biggest pruning mistake we see is shearing shrubs into balls, squares, or cupcakes, or any other shape you can imagine. And what that does is it creates this really dense outer growth. If you look here at this picture, you see there's just a little bit of green. And then there's all of this interior where the sun never shines and it is very dark. And what happens is, if you've ever, this was my neighbor's shrub, it wasn't mine, but on a walk, we were walking our dog and they have this shrub that seriously excessively pruned every month during the warm season. And I just peered in there and look, it's very dark. And I'm going to tell you in a little bit why that's not good. Here are some other mistakes that we see is pruning at the wrong time. I, first of all, do not rely on, if you're looking at a commercial landscape or even your HOA landscape, do not rely on them and what they do as the proper time to do things. I see pruning done all times a year and many times at the wrong time. So we want to ignore that. Also, we see the frequent shearing, which is when you get out your hedge trimmers and they're being sheared every month during the growing season. And the growing season is spring and summer into early fall. The topping of shrubs, or some people will just cut, directly on top, and that leaves the interior open to sunburn and all kinds of other problems. And also, people prune because they want a neat, tidy, and clean landscape. One that looks so clean that you can almost eat off of the ground. Now, the reasons why pruning too often is bad is it constantly removes the leaves that shrubs need to survive. So leaves, foliage, is how plants create food and energy for themselves. And when we constantly shear them back, then that pushes them immediately into a growth cycle. So they're trying to grow it back to get enough foliage so they can make food and energy for themselves. And we just come back and we prune it off again. Now, this makes shrubs grow faster because they're constantly in an active growth phase, trying to grow back the foliage that was pruned off. And because of that, they use more water. Now, if you'll notice the shrub on the right here, you'll see there's some dead areas starting to form. And that is because of that repeated shearing from time to time. That is unhealthy for the plants. It prevents sunlight from reaching in there. So you start to get dieback, which means shrubs aren't going to live as long as if you just prune them infrequently. This is a sign, or what you see when you see shrubs that have been pruned frequently over time, and you'll see there's very little green here and large parts of the shrub are dying away. Yet, whoever is in charge of this landscape still comes every month and they're shearing more back. Now, we do have the shorter lifespan, and that's going to cost you money because then you're going to have to replace plants. You're going to see few to no flowers on shrubs. We are seeing decreased populations of all types of pollinators. And allowing your shrubs to grow and to flower is going to be a direct benefit to pollinators. And you will actually see hummingbirds and butterflies coming to visit. And they will be so happy because you have those flowers for them to drink from, and bees. Pruning too often, it's a waste of time. You are out there doing a job that does not need to be done, that is not healthy for your shrubs. And if you're paying someone to do that, it wastes money. And we all would like ways to save money. Now, as we move forward, we need to understand, how shrubs grow. And shrubs have an attractive natural shape. And this shape adds texture to the landscape. From a design perspective, it actually adds to the curb appeal of your property. Now, different shrubs have, they do grow differently. And good pruning is going to work with the plant. We're going to support the plant in the ways that it naturally grows, but we're not forcing it to grow in a way that's not natural. So I want you to take a look at this shrub. It's got lots of natural, beautiful natural shape, really pretty white flowers. But look at what it looks like in another landscape. It's been sheared off into this ball. Not healthy for the shrub, takes away the flowers that the pollinators will enjoy. It does nothing to add the curb appeal of this house. So which one would you rather have? This one that you prune once every 3 years, or this one that's pruned every month? Now, the goals of good pruning is we want to support and maintain a natural form. We want to improve the structure of the shrub. And that's going to allow light and air into our shrubs. You know, when I showed you the picture of the repeatedly sheared shrub, and I'm pulling back the top to look down in it, there's no light or air getting in there. And that can lead to more issues with plant disease. And good pruning is going to encourage healthy new growth. So let's start talking first about when we need to prune shrubs, because for some of you, that's going to be now. Now, the major pruning season is spring, and that's great because the weather is nice and we want to be outdoors. But the timing is dependent on the type of shrub you have. Remember, I told you there's 2 groups of shrubs, and the way to tell which group they belong in is dependent on when they bloom. And here's a shocker for some of you. Shrubs don't always need to be pruned every year. It's okay to leave them alone. If they have room to grow and they are healthy, you don't have to touch them. So there are 2 groups of shrubs when it comes to the timing of when to prune. Now, our first group are our spring blooming shrubs. These are usually the first to flower in the year. And they bloom on old wood, meaning they are blooming on growth that happened the year previous. So it's blooming, if you have a shrub that's a spring blooming shrub, it's blooming on wood that was produced the previous summer and fall. Now the other group are our spring to summer blooming shrubs. These bloom a little bit later, and they bloom on new growth. So they're going to bloom on new growth that's produced that same year in the spring. So let's talk about pruning those spring blooming shrubs. These are ones that don't bloom in the summer. They're the earlier bloomers, and then they stop for the rest of the year. So the timing of pruning is in late spring or early summer. And it's easy to tell when it's time because it's when the flowers start to fade, when the flowers start to dry up. Then you know it's time to prune them. Now, this is the only time of year that they should be pruned. And this is a frequent mistake a lot of people make, especially if you have your shrubs pruned several times a year. Because if these spring blooming shrubs are pruned in the summer or the fall, you're removing all that growth that they're going to normally be producing flowers on the next year. So if you have a shrub and you're wondering why it's not blooming in the spring, it could be because it's being pruned at the wrong time of year. And so we want to make sure that we don't make that mistake. So pay attention to when your shrubs bloom. If they bloom in the spring and then they're done, you're having a spring blooming shrub that should only be pruned once a year when it's done flowering. And that's it. Now, We have some examples of these spring blooming shrubs. We have bluebeard, also known as caryopteris. We have forsythia, Indian hawthorn, lilacs are also in this group, as are weigela, or weigela. So these are all examples of those that bloom just in the spring, and then we need to prune them when the flowers go away. Oh, oops, go back here. Next, we have our spring/summer blooming shrubs. And we prune them in the spring of the same year. So you're going to prune them if they need it once the danger of freezing temperatures has passed. And if needed, in late summer, you can do a light pruning if they're getting too big. So we would do more of the major pruning in the springtime. And then in late summer, you can do a light pruning, maybe removing a quarter to a third of the outer growth. Now, we don't want to prune in the winter or in the middle of summer. Summers are hot, and the heat puts stresses on our plants. And if we are pruning, and so all of the plant's resources are dedicated to dealing with heat stress. And if you are pruning your shrubs in the middle of summer, you are forcing it to divert resources from heat stress towards rapid regrowth. And in the middle of summer, shrubs aren't going to grow back very fast because they're already stressed. And sometimes it can be the difference, when we're having hotter than normal summers, it could be the difference between a plant surviving a hotter than normal summer or dying. Okay, here are some examples of spring and summer blooming shrubs. We have butterfly bush, crepe myrtle, mock orange, also known as pittosporum, rose of Sharon, Texas sage or Texas ranger, however you want to say it, and yellowbird of paradise. So these we're going to be pruning in the spring and early spring, once the threat of freezing temperatures has passed, and then let them grow out. Now, most flowering shrubs only need to be pruned once a year or sometimes less. You can have a landscape filled with shrubs that maybe you are pruning them back every few years. The key to this working is that you have enough room for your shrubs to grow. And oftentimes that means, all the time it should mean that when you are looking to buy a plant for your landscape, look at how much room you have available, and then look at the mature size of the plant. You can look it up online on your phone while you're at the nursery, and make sure that you have enough room for that shrub to grow. Oftentimes when we crowd plants together, that results in, as they start to grow, they start to get crowded, and so we start to prune them too frequently. But you plant a shrub, and like say you have a shrub that says it's going to grow 5 feet wide, make sure you have at least 5 feet in width to allow them to grow. And it's less work for you. You're going to have an attractive, beautiful shrub to look at, and it's not going to take you hardly any time at all to maintain it. That picture I showed you earlier that I told you to remember, with the rows of the green blobs, that's one of the issues with that landscape. Shrubs planted too close together and no thought given to how big they would get for that area. And I'm going to show that picture at the end. When it comes time for pruning, we need to make sure that we have the right pruning tools. And I'm here to tell you there's nothing super sophisticated about the pruning tools. It's not going to break the bank for you to go out and get these. Most, all home improvement stores are going to have them. Nurseries are going to carry them, or you can just buy them online too if you would like. So first we're looking at our hand pruners. And these are what we use to make smaller cuts. Loppers have long, I'll show a picture in a moment, long handles, and they're very helpful because they allow you to kind of reach deeply into the shrub to make your cuts. Then we have pruning saw, which cuts through, larger, more woody stems towards the base of a shrub. Now, believe it or not, there are times that you can use hedge trimmers and it's actually okay. And I'll show you how in a little bit. So from left to right, we have hedge trimmers, excuse me, we have hand pruners, we have a pruning saw, and then we have loppers. So for most people, this is all that they need to take care of their shrubs. But I will tell you, I have lots of plants in my landscape. I'm a horticulturist and I tend to collect plants, and I do use a hedge trimmer. And I'm going to tell you how you can use it without coming out with, ball, squares, or cupcake shaped shrubs. Let's first talk about regular pruning. Now, what that means is we're kind of pruning our shrubs back, not severely. We're just doing a regular pruning, maybe, like we would do in the spring. Now, you can start out with using hedge trimmers, as you see here. You can start out and kind of just cut back the shrub as far back as you would like. For thicker branches, you can use your loppers or your hand pruners, and you're going to cut your shrubs back roughly to half their size in the spring. Now again, you don't have to prune. If there's enough room for your shrubs to grow, you can skip a year or two if you'd like. Now hedge trimmers I like for this type of pruning because it allows you to remove kind of some of that outer growth, and then I use my hand pruners or my loppers to kind of get in and get more of the thicker branches out of there. You do not have to worry about making precise pruning cuts. Now they may look really ugly right away, and I'm going to show you some ugly pictures. A little bit ugly once you've given them the haircut, but they grow back quickly. So here is an example. We have a landscape here and we've got some Texas sage shrubs. And so for an example, these shrubs are beautiful. You see how they've been allowed to grow to their natural size, but the homeowner knows they're going to grow even bigger because this is spring. And so they want to cut them back a bit so that they have room to grow without crowding out each other. So just look at these little red lines. This is an example of how you can go in here with a hedge trimmer and just go ahead and cut it back that way. And you could just do it, just gently round it. Now you may be thinking, won't that, is that going to, see, look at the neighbor shrub right back there. Do you want to know something about this shrub right here? To the left, that's the exact same shrub as what's over here. Look at how different that one is. And which one would you rather have? So the reason that if you do this with hedge trimmers, the reason that these aren't going to turn into that is this is a result of pruning every month. This is a result of pruning once a year. You see, there's a big difference. Now you can use hand pruners to do this if you don't want to do hedge trimmers. You can do loppers. However you're comfortable works just fine. You find the method that works nicely for you. Hedge trimmers, you can get ones that are electric. I have a battery powered one, rechargeable one, and that's really nice because I don't have to have a cord on it. And landscapers will usually use those that have an actual gas engine on it because they're going through lots of shrubs at a time. So here is a globe mallow, and this is what it looked like when it was flowering in the spring. This is my globe mallow, by the way. And once it was done blooming, this is a spring blooming shrub. So once it's done blooming is when I'm going to prune it. And so that's usually in later spring. This is what it looks like after it's been pruned back. And let's just be clear, that's ugly. It is. But you know what? Within a few weeks, it's all leafed out and it's beautiful again. And that's the only pruning that needs to be done. There is another type of pruning technique that we need to get familiar with, and that is severe pruning. We also call it renewal pruning. And so what happens is as shrubs grow, their branches become woodier as they age, and they get wider, they grow thicker. And over time, those branches will produce fewer leaves and not as many flowers. And so you might just see a lot of woody growth, but not much of the pretty stuff, the leaves and the flowers. Now, severe pruning in many cases can rejuvenate them. Kind of think of it as the fountain of youth for shrubs. And to do this, we cut our shrubs back severely to about 8 to 12 inches from the ground. And to do this, the easiest way to do this is start out with hedge trimmers to remove the outer growth. Then you can use loppers to remove the thicker branches, and you might even need to use a pruning saw for very thick ones. Now, this should only be done in the spring, not in the summer and not in the fall. Now, if your shrubs are healthy, they're going to grow back. If they're not healthy, they might not grow back. But even if you had not done the severe pruning, they still would not have probably lived for very long, even if you had done nothing. Here is another example of shrubs cut back. And I tell people it's kind of like spring cleaning in the garden. And, but again, we don't do it every spring. We do it every few years. So as I said, hedge trimmers to get rid of that outer growth, or you can use hand pruners or loppers, whatever you like, and then the pruning saw to get those thicker branches. Now, new growth, depending on the type of shrub you have, will show up in 2 to 6 weeks. And at first, you might lament and think, oh my gosh, I just see wooden, there's just wood. I don't see anything green. And just when you think it's not growing back, you'll start to see a little bit of green come. And then once that little green starts to come, they grow back very quickly. Now, not all shrubs can tolerate this. If they've been old or been sheared repeatedly for years, they may not grow back. So keep that in mind. But what we're doing is, especially with those that are maybe older and healthy, and we're not happy, we're not going to accept them anymore the way they are. We're giving them a chance. We're giving them a chance. Now, we have really pretty much escaped the window to do this type of pruning. This is something we really want to wait to do in not the really hotter parts of spring. I would say if temperatures are in the 80s, feel free to go ahead and do it, or even in the 60s and 70s. But once it gets hotter than that, it's a little too stressful for the plant. So, we got to time it appropriately in the spring. So here is an example, a real-time example of pruning. So this is Rio Bravo Texas sage shrub. And it's gotten really kind of big, and it was we're coming out of winter time, and Texas sage don't look great in the winter. So they're getting kind of big, and so the homeowner was like, okay, it's time to cut these back. So they did. So that's and they cut it back quite a bit. And this is how it should look. It's absolutely appropriate. Now, a month later, so about 4 weeks, you start to see a little bit of green growth occurring on this area. This is 2 months later. Look at all that lush green growth. Isn't it pretty? And then 3 months later, 3 to 4 months later, they began to bloom. So it really is like the fountain of youth. And it just adds a lot of beauty. Let's say you have an area, this is an HOA area here, but we have a lot of gumdrop shrubs. Actually, they're more like cupcakes. And though they're planted very close together, these are Texas sage. Texas sage get about 5 to 6 feet wide. So they're too big. They don't have enough room to grow. They're pruned every single month. And the good news is you can absolutely rehabilitate a situation like this. So in your own yard, if you have one like this, if you have too many shrubs too close together, this is what we do. We go in and we remove excess shrubs. So in here, it's roughly every other shrub. And then for the ones that remain, we do a severe pruning in the springtime, and then we allow them to grow back to their natural size. In this situation, the shrubs will get about this tall and about this wide and have a beautiful natural shape and texture, and they will flower. Now, here's a third type of pruning we need to talk about. This is called selective pruning. Another word for it is thinning. So let's say you have tall shrubs that you like because they screen out an objectionable view or they kind of cover your wall and privacy. And you don't want to do a severe pruning and prune them all the way back down to the ground because you're going to lose all that privacy for quite a while. So what we can do in this case is we remove a few select branches at the base of these shrubs in springtime. And we're going to make pruning cuts as far down to the base of the plant as we can. And then the next year, you're going to select some other big branches to do that with. And I'm going to show you an example here. What first of all this does is it maintains the overall height, but you're going to thin out a little bit of the growth in between. Now, when you are cutting a few branches at the base, that's going to stimulate new growth at the base, and that growth will continue to grow over the next few years taller and taller. So here's an example. Here is a shrub, and it's kind of getting old and woody at the base, and so not very attractive. So in this situation, in one spring, you would go in and you would cut back the branches where you see the red. You can use loppers or a pruning saw for this job. Now you notice we haven't taken, we're not pruning the whole thing back. We're just taking out the thickest branches, which means they're the oldest branches and the woodiest branches. And over time, they don't produce as much foliage or flowers. So in the spring, we're removing 3 of the biggest. And then, within a couple of, within a month or two, you're going to see a lot of new growth growing up from those cut areas. Now, the following year, you're going to select another set of big branches, thick branches, and you're going to prune 2 or 3 of those away. So we're not reducing the height. We're just thinning out some of the excess growth, which is going to promote new growth from where those cuts are. Here is another example. This is a very, very tall yellow bells. And I'm going to show you this photo's before, okay? And then this is after. So you see there's a little bit of thinning that happened. And these 2 large branches were cut. And so we thinned out some of the growth, and then within a month, new growth was coming at the base. And then the following year, it was, we selected another couple of big branches. Now, this is a kind of more of a precise type of pruning. If you are working with a landscaper, you probably will want to be there and let them know which branches you want them to cut. Or you could take a little paint and just paint the branches red that you want them to cut back to the base. So let's look at some examples in general of just how to prune certain types of shrubs. Here we have yellow bird of paradise. Now this is a shrub that blooms on new wood. So because it blooms spring into summer. So we're going to prune it back February or March, and we're going to prune it back severely. And you can prune it back severely every year. This is one of the few shrubs you can prune back severely each year. So for my bird of paradise shrubs, I just come in with loppers and I just cut them back every year, and then you get that beautiful new growth. You don't have to cut them back each year if you don't want to, but I think with this type of shrub, I think they look more attractive when you do so. Now, you don't need to prune these later in the year. You can just leave them alone. Here we have Texas sage. Now, there are 15 at least different species of Texas sage, meaning there's 15 different kinds. And they can vary in their leaf color. They can be almost gray-white. They can be blue-gray, green-gray, and more of a darker green, depending on the species. And then the flower color can be different too. So these plants do very well. They are natives. And honestly, these are the shrubs that are the most mistreated in the landscape. So this is a shrub that blooms, in summer and fall. And, if there's humidity, they're going to bloom a lot more. And so we're going to prune them back in March or April. And you can do regular pruning where you're going to prune up maybe half its size in the springtime. Now, you can also do severe pruning for those that are getting kind of woody. You can do that every 3 to 4 years in the spring. And if you have enough room for it to grow, you don't need to prune it every year at all. I have Texas sage, and I share this with my clients all the time, but I have Texas sage in my own yard, and I prune them back severely once every 3 years. But the rest of the time I don't prune it at all because it has plenty of room to grow, and it covers my wall. It provides food for pollinators, and it just has beautiful color throughout the warm season. All right, here's another example. This is Indian hawthorn. This is one of those shrubs that blooms on old wood, meaning it's going to bloom on growth produced the previous year. So we're going to prune them after flowering has finished in the springtime. And that's the only time they should be pruned. You really don't need to prune these back severely. You could just do a little bit of, maybe pruning them by half their size. All right, I'm going to tell you a story about this picture. This is a tale of two shrubs. And these shrubs were blooming. These are green cloud Texas sage. They were blooming beautifully in July, and they were located in front of a car dealership. Now, my husband and I were on a road trip, and we were on our way to Tucson, and we stopped off for lunch in this town, and I noticed all the really pretty blooming sage shrubs. So I ran out to take pictures of them. And at the same time that I was there, this is a car dealership, by the way, there was a landscape crew there. And the difference between the shrub on the left and the shrub on the right is 5 minutes. And by the time I left, we left after lunch, every single one of these flowering shrubs were turned into green bulbs. We have to start asking ourselves, why? Why are we doing this? Why do we have this default method of maintenance and maintaining shrubs? This type of formal pruning right here became popular during the Victorian era. That was a long time ago, the late 1800s. And we have shed most things from the Victorian era, but for some reason we have held on to this one. And you just have to ask yourself why. You just have to ask yourself why. So here are sheared juniper shrubs. When we can allow them to grow nice and into their natural size, they're beautiful. Here we have trailing rosemary that are pruned into gumdrop shapes. Why not let them grow and flower? And they add so much more beauty. These, as we can tell, are planted way too close together. These are the exact same type of shrub. The one on the right is pruned once a year. The one on the left is pruned every month. The one on the left uses a lot more water than the one on the right. It is not very healthy and is constantly in a state of stress because whenever it tries to grow the leaves it needs to make food and energy for itself, it's pruned away. Which one would you rather have? Now, many of you may have a landscaper who maintains your landscape. And this type of excessive pruning, shearing shrubs into balls, squares, and cupcakes is the default for most landscapers. Now, these are very hardworking individuals. And in many cases, what they're doing is they're doing what they think you want. They're thinking what they do is good for the plant in many cases, most cases. And they are proud of the work they do, keeping your landscape neat and tidy. But I'm going to tell you that allowing your shrubs to grow to their natural size and shape is not a good business model. Because if your shrubs only need to be pruned maybe once a year or less, you don't need them as often. And that's not a good business model. On the other hand, if when they come and they blow and maybe they rake and then they take off just a little bit off your shrubs, they just shear them a little bit with the hedge trimmers. When a homeowner sees that, they're like, oh, they were here, they were doing a good job. Some homeowners want their shrubs that way. So if you do not, what we need to do is take them off of autopilot, meaning that if what they do is normally come and they do their job and you don't really have conversation and they just do it and they leave, well, that's not going to work in this case. You need to have that conversation and say, don't prune anything unless I tell you to. They can clean, rake, blow, do whatever else you want them to do, but say, don't prune anything. I will let you know when I want something pruned. And you can do this even if there's a language barrier. It's very easy you can go out and if let's say you have some shrubs you want to have pruned about half their size. Go out with a landscaper, stand in front of the shrub and just put your hand on the shrub kind of where you want them to prune it back to. That's as easy as we can make it. And that works. If your landscaper, sometimes if you have a larger landscape company and you have a lot of rotating landscape workers, different ones all the time, that message may not come through very well. And if you keep having the issue where they keep coming in and doing that, you might want to look for another landscaper, one that will listen and that will remember. So smaller companies are sometimes better. You can also look around your neighborhood. Who has some really nicely maintained shrubs? If they have a landscaper, ask them who it is. Landscape companies are very neighborhood centric because it makes sense. That way they don't have to travel far and they can get a lot done in one place. And there's a lot of competition. So if one isn't working well for you, go ahead and hire another one. One thing that happens quite often, and I like this especially when I've worked with my clients, is when they see how easy it is to and how much less pruning needs to be done, they elect to take care of it themselves. They say, you know what, I know what to do. I'm going to go out and take care of my own shrubs. I'm going to get these pruning tools and I'm just going to take it over. They're saving a ton of money. And there's also that nice reward that you feel when you know that you've done it yourself, and you've done it properly, and that your shrubs are going to react in a good way, and it's the best feeling. Okay, remember this picture from the beginning? I told you we'd talk about it a bit. Now, as I mentioned, these shrubs are planted very close together. These shrubs grow an average of 5 feet tall and wide. And You'll see the one over here is starting to get some dieback just because it's been sheared all the time. And so this was the wrong plant for this lower area. This lower area is maybe 8 to 10 inches. So in this area, what we would do is we would take out just all those shrubs. You don't really need to plant anything in a really tight area like that. So the solution is removing all these shrubs. Now for the ones in the back, which do have more room, what we're doing is we're removing every other shrub. That way we don't have to keep pruning them. And then the ones that we are leaving will have room to grow out. And they're going to cover this wall beautifully. They're going to stretch out and you're going to get beautiful natural shape. And in this case, you're going to get wonderful purple flowers. So if you have an area like this in your landscape, let's say you have a smaller area, maybe you have an area where you have 3 shrubs that are too close together. We'll remove the middle shrub. And the benefit of this also is you're saving a lot of water because each one of these shrubs has an irrigation emitter to it and it's getting watered regularly. You're also cutting down on a lot of maintenance, whether you're paying for it or whether you do it yourself. And even if you don't have a landscaper and you're the one out there taking care of it, that's still a lot of time. And we all need more time, don't we, to do more of the things that we want to do. So I hope that you have learned through this that properly maintained shrubs are going to save you time and money, and they're going to result in attractive, healthy shrub. They're going to increase your curb appeal. You're going to get more pollinators visiting your garden, and you got a lot more time on your hands to figure out what else you're going to do. So thank you for allowing me to share this today.
Thank you for that great presentation, Noelle. All I can say is amen. I am so happy that you were speaking on this topic. It's a huge pet peeve of mine, and I simply don't understand why it's being done. So you've shed some light on that, given us some great information on how to deal with it and rectify plants that have been treated in this way. And so I really appreciate the talk and the education that you've provided today. So just as a reminder to our participants, this slide includes some of our contact information. Feel free to reach out to us. And as a final reminder, we already have all the information we need from your webinar registration form, and you should expect your rebate if you do indeed qualify within 90 days. So everyone, thank you so much for your interest in conserving water and expanding your landscape knowledge. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.